after class.
Okay.
That's it.
Okay. You know, most journeys, to some extent, you're aware of what you don't have and what you want. For example, you go home, as you're driving home tonight, you say to yourself, maybe for dinner I want to have Cheerios. That's what we used to have for lunch, dinner, and breakfast. And so you go home. Hello. And once you're situated, you look in the fridge and you realize you have no milk. Good morning, Michelle. So you already know what it is that you want, which is you want Cheerios for dinner. Well, to have Cheerios, you need a couple of things. You need a bowl, you need a spoon, you need Cheerios, and of course you need milk. You have everything except perhaps the most important component, unless you just want to eat the Cheerios dry, which is milk. And since you have no milk, you say, okay, 7-Eleven is right across the street from where I live. You go down the stairs, you go to the shop, grab some milk, go back up, and your desires are satisfied. There are some journeys that are quite unique and somewhat troublesome, which is you've had a relatively good day, it's about 2 or 3 in the afternoon, and you wake up from a nap, and for some strange reason, you don't feel quite yourself, and you don't know why. You try to read a book, it doesn't work. You try to listen to an audio of sorts, that doesn't work. You try to call a friend, that doesn't work. You contact your boyfriend, Joe, and you find him to be a complete imbecile. You don't know why. And then you realize there is something missing, but you don't know what. And it's very difficult to kind of go on a journey to figure out what exactly it is you're missing and how you can satisfy it. And if I was to put this in the context of two figures, one Plato, the other Socrates, you could say that Plato, for the most part, knew what his home was. He would wake up in the morning, write his plays. Maybe he would go to school and follow what his father desired for him, which is to become a politician, to become a lawyer of sorts. He runs into Socrates, and Socrates gives him a taste of a different home. I don't know what the home is. It can't be seen, it can't be touched, it can't be tasted, it can't be heard. It's just something you intuit. And for someone like Plato, it's a very dim feeling. All you know is that there is something that you feel when you look at Socrates. Or if you happen to be a disciple of Jesus, like Andrew, you feel something when you see Jesus. And you don't know what it is, but all of a sudden, what you used to call home becomes irrelevant. Now you find yourself emotionally, psychologically, even intellectually homeless. And being homeless is very difficult, like, you know, the physical homeless folks that you see around the street once in a while. And you try to kind of go back to the stuff that's familiar to you. You talk to your father, you talk to your mother, you talk to your friends. Because to some extent you want to understand why you're feeling this way. Why has Socrates touched you in such an interesting way and you can't figure things out? And remember, our intellect is like a messiah. It comes down to figure out the issues at hand. But it's limited due to age, to experience, biases, prejudices, fears, anxieties of sorts, doubts. And stand before you two options. You can either run to the home that's most familiar to you, your friends, boyfriend, girlfriend, becoming a lawyer, becoming a poet, becoming a playwright, or you have some restless nights where the image and the feelings of Socrates does not leave you. And so you kind of go and stand in the middle of the city where you first encountered him. And you realize that Socrates has made you homeless, and for some strange reason, he also provides a home for you, interestingly enough. And all of a sudden he shows up, and the more time you spend with Socrates, the more homeless you become in this other area. The problem with Socrates is because the path that he's offering you can't be tasted or touched or seen or be heard by the ears. It's a very confusing place to be. And you have to take a leap of faith. You have to overcome a good amount of doubts and fears. And if you can hang out with Socrates for about 10 years, perhaps, then maybe you'll figure things out. Some journeys are known, some journeys are unknown. A woman who has been married or a man who's been married, and they've both been fully devoted, but over time things happen and they go their own separate ways. Marriage has been their home for many number of years. When they realize that they can no longer hang on to one another and they need to walk their own separate ways, divorce is not something that they're familiar with. It's not something they've experienced. So it's a journey that you find one home and now you're emotionally homeless. In other words, you're no longer a husband, you're no longer a boyfriend, you're no longer attached, you no longer have a companion. You find yourself in this category of just being single now. And single is not something you've experienced for 5, 10, 15, 20 years. And it's a very difficult place to be because you've forgotten what it means to be single. And now you want to find a home where being single is comfortable. Being single is, to some extent, compatible with the way you feel and think. And that usually takes time. And, a few years pass by until you realize it's okay being single. And then you go back in the dating scene. At the point I'm trying to make, depending on where you are in life, what exactly it is you're pursuing, you find yourself a home. Then once you realize you're saturated in that particular area of life, you have to leave it, either by force or willingly. And then the journey you're taking is quite unknown. The only, I think, difficulty that someone like Jesus or Socrates or Muhammad, the problems that these folks give us is that they push us, encourage us, inspire us to pursue a path that's unknown. And you need to have a good amount of passion. You need to be inspired. You need to be, to some extent, in love with the things that has grown inside you to kind of say it's okay being homeless, it's okay being depressed. And you can never do this on your own. The path that Socrates provides, you can never pursue it on your own. You need a support system. But if I was to perhaps go back to your question, am I traveling this summer? Yeah, we're probably going to go to Yosemite. The fantasy is that the car will not break down. We're not going to go over a cliff. The road is not going to give. There are no sinkholes. Once in Yosemite, you're not going to be bitten by rattlesnakes or devoured by bears. We'll have a relatively decent time. That's the expectation. And whenever any of those expectations are not met, you find yourself confused, to some extent hopeless, homeless. So, yeah. Anyone else? Yeah. Julian?
You talked about what it means to be a parent.
A parent?
Yeah, taking on the role of a father and taking on the role of a mother.
I think it's something that we've talked about in the past, in the many classes you've been in. But one of the things about, I think, ideas and questions is that even though you may have asked the same question like 10 years ago, it takes a while for you to understand the question. It takes a while for you to understand the responses you get from different people. It takes a while for you to process both the questions and the answers. And because of, I think, these limitations, repetition is the most important thing. It's like you want to learn to play the piano, and your teacher comes to the house, and you have to keep playing the same notes over and over and over again for days onwards. And I think ideas and talking about ideas and receiving ideas and the responses to some of the questions are very much the same. So just in case, you hear my answers to be somewhat the same or other people's answers to be somewhat the same, the thing you need to keep in mind is that it's okay if you've heard these things before. You need to hear the same thing 1,000 times before they can actually go inside you and be processed. Like all desires, we are governed by fantasies. That's how everything begins. You sign up for a class because you fantasize graduating. You have no idea what this class will do to you, what the instructor will do to you, what the ideas will do to you. But the fantasy keeps you going. You may even be inspired by the fantasy of pursuing a PhD in philosophy, and you do so. And then for the next 10 years, you devote yourself to books, to writing essays, to talking about philosophical matters with your friends and parents. You may even write a few books. And then there comes this point where you want to find a job, and you realize that there are lots of PhDs out there flipping burgers. And so you go to the interviews and you realize you're doing a really, really awful job in answering the committee's questions. And so you come out kind of depressed. And you kind of realize this is the reality of where you are, which is you're really awful in doing interviews, but you really love philosophy. And so you have fantasy kind of crashing into reality, and these two create a good amount of conflict. You hate yourself for doing philosophy because full-time positions in social sciences are very, very rare, very difficult to obtain. Had you majored in business, or had you done your psychology, wanting to be a therapist, given that a lot of people are sick these days, you would have prospered. But philosophy in the classroom, very, very tough. So I think a lot of people kind of fantasize about what marriage is, what relationships are all about. And one of the nice things I think about the American culture is that, and it's everywhere now, that you have a boyfriend, you have a girlfriend, 2 years later you get tired, you walk away. Marriage kind of impacts you a different way. So you don't really know what you're getting yourself into. None of us do know. It's impossible for any of us to know what exactly we're getting ourselves into. We are, again, governed by fantasies and dreams, narratives that are built on basically fluff. Now, sometimes having children happen accidentally. You enjoy sex, you're not really planning to have children or having a kid. Your wife comes to you and says, I've missed my cycle, and maybe you're ready, maybe you're not ready, but the idea of being a father, the idea of being a mother, it's very exciting. And so what you do is, now remember, you don't really know what commitment really is. You don't know what sacrifice is. This is not a culture where people sacrifice themselves for another. It's a very hedonistic. We went to Italy last year. Every street has about 30 churches. And it's an interesting place. It has a lot of history to it. But the sort of way that people live their lives, you would think that a culture such as Italy that has roots in religion and philosophy, things that are borrowed from the Greeks, from the Romans, that would have impacted the people's psyche, but they're really pleasure-driven. They like to have a good time. There's nothing wrong with that. And so you and your companion go to Target, go to Babies R Us. They're no longer in business, of course. And you buy cribs. You paint the room. You do this. You do that. Now, there's a difference between being a mother and being a father. Mothers are really, they're held hostage in the world of a child. They're very intimate. They're one and the same with the kid. As the saying goes, you know, a woman has her heart inside her chest. Once she has a child, her heart now is outside, inside the kid's body. So whatever the kid experiences, the mother experiences. And it's a very traumatic experience in some ways. Fathers, on the other hand, they're on the outside. It takes a long time for a father to become close to his kids. You know, and that also depends on the father, how reflective they may be, how hedonistic he may be. Mothers have an easier time because they come out of the mother, they smell the mother from a very, very, you know, few months old, within the belly. So there is a world of differences between being a father and being a mother. Then fantasy eventually will hit reality, which is you may, with your companion, live in a one-bedroom. Now you have a child, the one-bedroom is insufficient. Well, if you want a two-bedroom, one room being for your kid, the other being for you and your wife or your husband, well, if you live in San Francisco, for example, the rent is going to be about $3,000. Now, are you educated? Do you have a good job? How old are you? Are you like 18 or 19? Have you overcome the desires and the temptations of the iron stage, of the bronze stage? Do you drink? Do you smoke? Do you watch porn? These are all things you need to consider. How was this particular relationship founded on? Did you go to a party, find someone physically attractive, bed this person, and all of a sudden 2 months later you say, I love you? You know, that particular relationship is founded on basically sex. Now, how stable could it be? No one really knows. Time will only tell. Then you realize as a man that you have to perhaps leave your school, get 2 jobs, and go back to what Karl Marx argued about, that you have a job that is so foreign to your creativity, to you as a human being, that you're like a mule. You know, as if you watch the movie The Matrix, there's a scene in The Construct where Morpheus looks at Thomas Anderson and says, the Matrix kind of creates the human being to be this, a Duracell battery. And that's what it is. As you use other people to get ahead in life, life uses you to get ahead as well. Your boss uses you. And so you're used as a Duracell battery. You come home and your 2 weeks check is about maybe $1,000, maybe $2,000. Most of it has to go for diapers, for formula, rent, utilities, and you're 18, you're 19, you're 20. You were really not expecting any of this. You thought that this fantasy is going to be really, really exciting, inspiring. But little by little, you become more meat. You know, that's what life does to you. Remember, life is never, ever, ever your friend. Life is there to crush every goal, every dream you've ever had. You know, that's what Albert Camus, the Algerian philosopher, used to argue, that life really has only one function: to kind of step on every dreams and hopes you have, to get you really, really depressed. You just have to be very cunning to distract yourself and to look at life as like a toy store. But if you were to be like Albert Camus, if you were to be like Jesus Christ, you'll come to realize that this is really a den of thieves. It's there to just demolish you left and right. Now, as a father, when you come home, as a man, you come home, you realize, well, your wife has been staying home with this kid for maybe 5, 6, 10 hours. You come home and you want to rest, but there is no rest to be had. Your wife is going to need some help. She needs some time to herself. Now, you're agitated, you're frustrated, you don't really like your job, but what can you do? And you have this fantasy that you're going to be a great father. And perhaps for the first few weeks or few months you will be. But life then gets in the way. Frustration. Imagine what Freud, you know, if you're like a boiler system, all the pressures that you experience on a daily basis, they get stuck inside you. And at a certain point, they just explode. Now, you scream at your child to be quiet. They won't let you sleep. And before you know it, you're becoming the thing that you hated. You never imagined yourself to be, which is you lack patience, you lack tolerance, you scream, you shout, you yell, you use a good amount of profanities because you want your life to be a different way. You're tired of screaming. You're tired of your child screaming. You're tired of your child being sick all the time. And add to the fact that your wife looks at you differently now. You're no longer the center of attention, it's the child. And as a man, that's going to impact you. And one of the ways that you cope with all this stuff is perhaps you smoke, perhaps you drink, perhaps you watch porn, perhaps you go to UFC. I don't know what the people do these days. And because, your relationship with your parents is not as strong, you don't have relatives around you, you don't have grandparents around you, you realize that you and your wife are the only people raising this kid, and you can't do it. It's impossible. You need extended family. Friends are no good. Okay. And you realize as your marriage is continuing with your child, as so-called you're a father and she's a mother, you're kind of parting to some extent ways, intellectually speaking. Now, that's if you haven't really studied the social structure, if you haven't been reflecting at all. If you happen to be somewhat reflective, then you have to ask yourself, okay, and let's say you have wrestled with the difficulties and issues of marriage, you've been relatively prosperous, and your kid is now 4 or 5 or 6. Now the question is, if you happen to live in, say, Oakland, well, where do you want to send your kid to school? Public? Private? If you send them to public, what's going to become of them? Are they going to be exposed to drugs? At what age? Are they even going to experiment with drugs? Are they going to come home with profanities? Are you going to send them to private school? A private school, they cost money about $30 to $40, $50, $60,000. And this is not, I'm not talking about 4-year school or 2-year school. I'm talking about just first grade. And before you know it, as life burdens you more and more and more on a daily basis, that's if you're physically healthy, your wife is physically healthy, both of you have health insurance, your child is healthy, there are no real wrinkles in your life, there's a good chance that after about 5 or 6 years, your marriage is going to dissolve and your kid is going to be used like a ping pong ball here and there. So things are complicated. And like anything else, initially, all narratives are exciting. Once you get into it and your hands get dirty, you want to run the other direction. Sometimes it's possible, sometimes it's not. Yeah, if you can avoid it, do so. Yeah. Yeah.
The role of jester, what is it?
This past summer, 2 months ago or a month ago, we were in New York because my nephew Armand graduated. And we went to Washington Square Park and we ran into Chris Rock. My sister is very bold. She's very tiny. She's very, so she goes to him and says, "Are you Chris Rock?" And it's early in the morning. He wants to be left alone, and he says, "Yes, I am. Can we take a picture?" Sure. And all of a sudden, like 50 of us, gather around him, touching him at all these places. You have certain comedians, jesters, who they're looking for an easy laugh. They don't really observe life. Kind of like what Plato had said many, many thousands of years ago, that if you really want to laugh, get a good laugh, just sit back and observe what human beings do on a daily basis. But you have to pay close attention and find it profoundly funny. But most of the comedians are not of that nature. They like to make money. They like to kind of make people laugh by using profanity, say silly, stupid things. Then you have people like Chris Rock. You have people like Jerry Seinfeld. You have Dave Chappelle. What's the other guy's name? I forget. So these are people who stand back, look at life, and come on the stage and tell us what we experience on a daily basis in a way that makes all of us laugh. Now, for Shakespeare, the clown is the only person who's able to go to the king's court and make fun of the king. No one else can. If you go to the king and tell him straight up what's wrong with him, you'll probably be executed. If, on the other hand, the clown goes, the clown can go to places where most of us can't go in regards to how ridiculous the king really is. Now, you also have in the Native American culture that the most inspired, the most insightful, intuitive things that you will ever hear in your life will come to you from someone who makes you laugh. There is a guy in the Persian world, his name is Shams Tabrizi. He used to be Rumi's teacher for a number of years. And he said that you will never learn anything from me in private. If you want to learn anything from me that's worth learning, listen to how I speak to the public, how I make them laugh, how I ridicule them. And so, and there is also another aspect to this, which is it's very difficult to look at someone and say, oh, you're really, really stupid, because that's going to be very offensive to them. If, on the other hand, you can create a story that's funny, it's about them, but because they're stupid, they don't realize it's about them. So you make them laugh, and you hope that you're planting some seeds because of humor, you know. And humor itself has a very, very interesting history to it. Nietzsche once, long time ago, had mentioned that there are really two things that you and I can do in life. You can either laugh or you can cry, because life is confusing, life is brutal, life gives you no direction about anything. And at the end of the road, when you get to your destination, whatever it may be, you kind of realize how stupid you've been, you know, the sort of time and energy you've spent on silly, ridiculous, childish things. And you have two options. You can either laugh or you can cry. Cry is when you take things inward, okay? But laugh is when you express it outward. One of the easiest things that we usually do is to laugh. Add to it the fact that we have a society that, especially for men, doesn't, and there's nothing wrong with that, by the way, that we are unable to express ourselves outwardly. The point is, humor is really, really, really good, but you have to use humor in the right way. Anyone else? Okay. Well, let's... Julian, yes.
I was just saying about how it seems like there's a good amount of older religions that believe in multiple gods. How does that fit into the idea that us as humans, we can only follow one master, one idea?
There are lots of different theories about it. Maybe Auguste Comte, at least it's the person I like the most when it comes to responding to this particular question. How did we go from the worship of many gods to the worship of a single God? That initially what happens is life is nothing but just meat. You know, you go to class, you talk a few hours, you go home and you look at your environment, it's nothing, it doesn't inspire you. And so what happens traditionally, culturally, like for example, somewhere like New Guinea, is that people go out, they find themselves a piece of rock, you know, and it happens to be relatively interesting for the elder of the community. They bring that rock home, they paint it, a couple of eyes, a couple of noses, ears, maybe just one nose. And they place that rock at the very center of the city. Now, every morning, every night, every afternoon, people come out, worship the rock. And there comes a point where they realize that the rock is no longer giving them the same feelings. So the elder trashes the rock, goes out and finds another one. So we used to worship things that were down here. And then you find yourself amongst the big trees, from where we get the word panic, that we used to worship the gods of the forest. You're amongst the gigantic trees, maybe gigantic trees with snow. on the ground. And there comes a point that human beings kind of looked up. They didn't want to look in front of them. They didn't want their gods to be so close, so immediate. You know, it's kind of like when you fall in love, that perhaps your best moments is when you yearn, when you long, when you're not in the presence of your lover. You write poetry, you daydream, you fantasize, you look at your cell phone 1,000 times. And eventually, of course, the two of you meet. But then after a while, you become saturated. And then you long for the separation so you could feel the same feelings, you know, that you miss them a bit. And so what happens at this stage in human evolution in regards to the idea of worship and religious sentiments is that you begin to create kind of like the Greek pantheon. You know, you have all these gods up there. They still have some human qualities, but for the most part, they're way up there. You can't piss them off. For the most part, you have to do things that will please them so your physical life can kind of prosper to some extent. Then we came to a certain stage in our evolution where we said that maybe all of these gods can kind of be combined in a one single God. So you have Yahweh, you have El Shaddai, you have Jesus Christ, you have Allah. And there came a point, he argued, and this is when, you know, science was making a good amount of headways. He came to realize that there is really no longer a need for a deity that's in paradise up there somewhere. Science cannot break things open. Science cannot reveal things to us, demystify human existence. And our new religion should be science. August Comte himself, of course, he built a cult. He was the king of this particular cult. He was married to a woman who kind of was crazy a little bit. She ended up in an insane asylum. She fell in love with, I think, a 14-year-old or a 16-year-old or maybe a 12-year-old. I think she was 17. He was maybe 27, 28. And he went to her parents and said to them, I love your daughter. What was her name? Send them on, something. And the parents say, no, you're an ugly looking man. I'm just kidding, I don't know how he looked. But he said, we're not going to give our daughter to you. He was very angry, he was very sad, he was very depressed. And when she got to be 18 a year later, she got sick and she died. Now, he had someone draw a portrait of this woman, this young woman, and he framed it, and he put this frame on the wall. He put a chair right underneath it, and every night he would worship. He would kneel and worship. And it's an interesting thing, because what you have is a man who believes that science, for the most part, can reveal most things to us. You know, we are rational creatures. At the same time, he has a longing within him that science can't answer, you know, which to some extent reveals kind of what the human being is all about to some extent. We have certain basic desires, but we also have desires we don't really understand. And those desires are awakened inside us when we run into something, maybe watch a great movie, maybe you read a great book, maybe you watch Harry Potter, maybe you run into a Socrates, who the hell knows. But eventually the forces of life are far, far, far too powerful. They'll go back to life. And whatever your intuition felt, it just kind of goes out the window. Yeah. Anyone else? Yeah, Andrew.
Does time really heal all of those? Or do past traumas that you thought were squared away and processed always have the potential to develop present?
One of the things about us is that we have a great capacity to be forgetful. We also have this great capacity to be distracted by our five senses, because they're kind of like dogs. They go out there and look for things that are immediately at hand and give us a good amount of pleasure. So that's one of the reasons as to why we are able to push down traumas, distraction. The other thing is we're wired to be forgetful. And there is nothing wrong with being forgetful. It's actually a great thing that you can forget for example, your encounter with Socrates, because if you were to remember your encounter with Socrates, your life would fall apart, and if I was to go back in time and tell you some of the experiences my former students have had with taking my classes, being exposed to ideas, being infected, contaminated by some of these ideas, their life really, really did fall apart, and it took them many, 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 many years to kind of recover. So it's good that we are able to forget, unless you don't want to forget certain pains. And not all traumas are bad, but the way traumas usually work is you have an experience, you don't really understand it, but the experience happens to be somewhat negative. I'm not going to talk about like the trauma that was given to Plato through Socrates. I'm going to just talk about, I don't know, I have a child, let's just say, that I go home after class, he runs to me because he's excited, and I've had a bad class, I slept badly, I'm exhausted, he comes to me and I scream at him. It's a negative experience, it's not yet traumatic. Because trauma needs to be repeated over and over again, unless you happen to be, if you have had an experience that was a jolt, a powerful shock to your system, that experience can create a trauma within like 5 minutes. There are other traumas that happen over time that you replay the experience over and over and over again. And so tomorrow night again, I go home, my son runs to me because he's a kid, he has an easier time forgetting, and I scream and I slap him. And this gets repeated over and over and over again. Now, let's say my wife goes to him and tries to calm him down, but because he's a boy, because he's proud, because of the way he's wired, he kind of tries to shut his mom and push her away. And so he keeps everything inside. And this kind of attitude continues for the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years. The truth is, by the time he's 20, 25, he wants to be in a relationship, he wants to be intimate. Chris? Hello. You dressed up. You look good. And so, because you have charisma, because you have magnetism, because you can speak eloquently, you're like honey. People are like flies. They kind of just come to you. But you haven't really cultivated, and you have lost your innocence, paradise lost, that because of the repetition of certain experiences, and because of the way you kind of interpret the experience, replay the experience over and over again, there's a certain part of you that is profoundly fearful, and you don't even know this. It's not yet into your awareness, but you're profoundly fearful of intimacy. And so you push everyone away. Now there comes a point where you're no longer 20, you're 30, maybe 35, and you realize that you've had a lot of dates. For example, you've been in a lot of relationships, but none have been long-term. And at a certain point you say, well, I want to kind of figure out what the hell is wrong with me. I'm getting old. As Pindar would say, I don't want to die alone or get sick alone. And if your therapist is any good, he or she has to go inside you. Now, let me also say that the idea of going to therapy is a relatively new concept. It's a new experience for us. If you examine most of the third world, for example, certain parts of Africa, many parts of the Middle East, India, people are brutalized in ways I can't describe. And yet they get to be 20, 25, they get married and have a healthy family life. And they're relatively healthy. So there has to be something about the culture, the sort of narratives it creates for its people. And remember, narratives are nothing but advertisements. You know, the more you're sold a certain type of advertisement, the more you become a consumer of those advertisements. Okay, the idea that your parents are always supposed to be the parents should love you, should listen to you. Parents were never in this particular position. You know, now you ask any parent, all of us are paranoid. Should I spank the kid? Should I not spank the kid? If I spank him, is he going to end up in therapy? Should I scream at him? Should I not scream at him? Should I be harsh? Should I be soft? How else should I? So everybody kind of is walking on eggshells. Is it possible to get rid of certain trauma that lives inside you? I think everything is possible. Anything is possible. You need tools. You need resources. You need encouragement. You need support. You know, since my friend Chris, may I? So, I'm from Iran. Chris is American. I'm an immigrant. He's not. I had to kind of work like a mule at a variety of different places to kind of end up in this place that I am right now. So he came to my class a long time ago with a friend of his, and just to visit. And after class, he came up, shook my hand, thanked me, and I asked him what he does. He said, yeah, I just finished with Berkeley. I got my BA in philosophy. So what are you going to do? I asked him. Oh, nothing. I'm just going to work at this particular place. Well, what are you going to do with a BA in philosophy? It doesn't do anything for you. Yeah, well, you know, it's okay. I can talk to my customers. I can talk to my friends about philosophy, this and that. Now, one of the advantages of being a little older is that I can sell you my experience, but I can't sell it to you if you're not in the right place, and I can't sell it to you if you're not attracted to me, and I can't sell it to you if you don't like me. So you need all these prerequisites for something to be sold to you. So I asked him if he would like to come to class again. He says yes. I said one condition, which is you need to go and do your MA, and once you get your MA, you come back and you teach for us. He resisted initially, but he said no. Now the narrative that exists in America is that education is not really that important. It can get by, it can make money all sorts of different ways, and you are very lucky. You're absolutely right. You can make money in all sorts of ways in America, you know. But this is my profession, and I think being around ideas and being able to express ideas to people, it's a great way to express who and what you are, and great life, make a livelihood as well. And, you know, I dangled this carrot in front of him. Go to school. I'll give you classes. Go to school. But he went. Again, support, encouragement. It wasn't just coming to class. For about 2 years, he would come to the house almost on a daily basis, not just for an hour or two, for 5, 6, 7 hours. We'd have breakfast, lunch, dinner. He helped me with the backyard, the front yard, unclogging the sewer toilets, all that. And when his MA was completed, he started teaching. Now he has 2 MAs. He's also pursuing a PhD. And when he gets to be like, 35, 36, probably will have a full-time position. His life is set. The point I'm trying to make is that you need a good amount of encouragement, you need a good amount of support, you need a good amount of attraction, inspiration, and if you have those things, then you can overcome a good amount of things. But there are some things you can do on your own. The most important things in life, you can never do on your own. It's impossible. Yeah. Anyone else? Okay. Michelle?
I did want to ask you, I've heard a lot of people talk about astroplanning, and I was wondering if you've heard of that before.
There was a guy, what's his name? Monroe, he wrote 4 volumes on out-of-body experiences. I'm trying to remember his name. He goes in the 1960s, 70s, I think. What was your question?
Astroplaning.
Yeah, I don't find that interesting.
I kind of thought, that's why I didn't want to ask you first, because I
Yeah.
thought this wasn't really your thing.
Yeah, I don't find it interesting. And most of it really has to do with the fact that my own teacher was a very practical man. He was very much on the ground. And the thing with the tradition I come from, you need to kind of occupy 2 worlds at the same time, but you need to be down here. You need to be grounded. Dreams mean nothing. Experiences mean nothing. Okay, someone who understands things really, really, really well, those are the people you want to be around. The only thing that will never ever leave you unless you have Alzheimer's is you being able to understand certain aspects of life really, really well. You can pass them on. I remember Hossein had come to the car wash. And there comes a point where your dreaming stage, they just end. In other words, you meet your teacher, you start having a lot of dreams, and then after 2, 3, 4, 5 years, all of a sudden, you kind of sit back and you say, man, I haven't had dreams for like a couple of months. I wonder why. So he came to the car wash. We were sitting, having some food from Dairy Queen. And once I find the opening, I say, I haven't had many dreams. And he says, you think you came here to watch movies? And then he smacks me on the head. Says, if you hang out with people who enjoy those things, then that's where you're going to gravitate. I don't recommend it because it's like a hippie lifestyle.
It seems ego-driven, because I don't believe that you were like spiritually enlightened, but you want to brag about how you were astroplaning and different dimensions and all this kind of stuff. So I was just wondering if there was any kind of grounded basis for what anybody's saying, or are they really just follow it?
First of all, the people who have profound, insightful experiences, they will never speak of them vocally and publicly. Never. Some things you must always keep hidden. It's one thing we'll talk about in Buddhism. One of the things that will naturally be given to any seeker who is able to complete the journey, not complete all the way, but according to your capacity and what you experience, is you'll be given magical powers. You'll be able to do some things that are extraordinary. Now, one of the things that we are told in this tradition, as well as other traditions, is that, first of all, never do them publicly. That's one of the things you'll also discover in the Gospel of Mark versus the Gospel of John. In the Gospel of John, Jesus waits and waits and waits and waits for a huge audience. And when there are like 1,000 people there, then he says, okay, now I'm going to multiply bread and fish. I'm going to bring Lazarus back to life. In the Gospel of Mark, he does something very interesting. He says he heals people, but he's especially like the girl who's dead. And he usually tells the people whom he's healed never to repeat the experience to anyone. That it's just between Jesus and the person. He never does anything in public because he wants people to understand. And it's something we'll talk about when we get to the Gospels, especially the Gospel of Matthew and Luke, the temptations, that despite the fact that Satan offers him all these kind of avenues, that if he was to follow Satan, do what Satan asks, Jesus will be of a stature where people begin to follow him naturally. And Jesus says, no, I just don't want people to follow me because they like me. I want people to follow me because they understand, why they are following. So it's not very difficult to trick people. It's very difficult to make them understand. So don't be tricked. Anyone else? Chris? Okay, let's talk about Buddhism, hopefully bury this tradition tonight, so we can move on to bigger and better things. So for those of you who weren't here on Wednesday, or for those of you who've just forgotten, let me just do a very, very brief recap. There is a woman who gets pregnant, like all mothers. Now, our mothers are very lucky because not a single one of them run into a witch who tells them that you're going to have a son and your son is going to hate you, or a good possibility of hating you. This particular woman, some 3,000 years ago, had this unfortunate experience of running into a magician who looks at her and says, you're pregnant, you're going to have a son, and he'll have two options. Or he'll have two windows or gates before him, and he has to choose one. He'll either enjoy the world of the senses, or he'll become homeless. That the physical world will no longer bring joy to him, will no longer create any desires for him, and he has to go on this long journey to figure out what the hell is wrong with him on the inside. And so when this woman hears of this, she does what any one of us in this class do. Imagine if you have this feeling you're going to get sick, you probably go home, you drink some orange juice, you eat some garlic to kind of make sure that, the flu doesn't pay you a visit, it'll just pass you by.